Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome back to Access to Democracy. Alan Miller returns with a return guest who hasn't been around recently. It's been a couple of years. The Honorable David Knutson of the 1st District Court. And Judge, welcome back.
Well, it's nice to be here, Alan. Thanks for asking me on the show.
It's always a pleasure. I'll tell you a little bit about Judge Knutson because he is too shy or to tell you himself, but he was a member of the Minnesota legislature for 12 years and worked his way up to a leadership position in the legislature. Then he got appointed by, I believe, Governor Pawlenty, and has been on the district court for 12 years. One of the first things, and he's been on this program since he's been in the legislature. I mean, I can't believe we've been here 18 years, and you've been on the show going way back.
Right.
And, yeah. When he was a legislator, we were of different political persuasions, but he was a reasonable individual. He was someone you could talk to. He was someone you could cross the aisle and have a legitimate conversation with, which is just about gone in every political situation, whether it's statewide or federal.
Well, thanks for those comments.
It was more civil. And he has been of the same philosophy as a judge. Fair, and I'm pushing him for elevation to the next court, to the Court of Appeals, but Judge Knutson can't talk about it, and he won't tell you. But very recently, in the Farmington area, there was a group of Islamic people who, let's get their name correct, American Islamic Relations Committee, or CARE, who had property and wanted to use that for a cemetery. Well, we are living in a time of great prejudice, and immediately there was resistance, and their application was turned down by, I believe, the town council. They went to the court. They said things like, we're going to lose money on this property. It determined that was not true, tax-wise and otherwise. And a few months ago, Judge Knutson came down with a decision saying that the town acted in an arbitrary and capricious manner and directed that the people be given the permit to go ahead and build their cemetery, which is very important to them. And you might not have gotten that with another judge who would be more swayed by personal prejudice or by pressure from the political side of it. That is not the story with this man, and it stands him really heads and shoulders above others, that you practice what you preach and what your oath stands for. And I, in particular, was very impressed with that decision.
Well, thank you, Alan. And of course, as I mentioned to you earlier, we can't talk about ongoing cases and make any comments or discussion other than what we present in our written orders and in court. So.
Which is why I can talk about it. But we always got along well, and we never really agreed politically. But that's what it's all about. That's what it should be all about, as opposed to what we're seeing right now on certainly the presidential level and in both parties, but particularly in the Republican Party. I don't know. We seem to have just dropped down in civility to the point where we can't have those kind of conversations anymore, and we should have those kind of conversations.
Well, I agree, and of course I'm not going to get involved with the political discussion necessarily, but it's just, in my perception and in observing this and having been involved in politics, but even more so on the bench at this time, it's a total lack of listening or hearing people and understanding what somebody is saying and trying to put yourself in their shoes and understanding their perspective. And obviously, and I appreciate your comments, but that's what I tried to do in the legislature, and I think I try to do that on the bench. But the unfortunate part, what I see from the bench, are all the disputes where people fail to do that. They fail to talk to one another, to really listen to what the other party is saying. And oftentimes I'm shocked when people come into the court and the attorneys are ready to argue, and the first thing I ask them is, well, have you talked with each other? Well, no, Your Honor, we haven't yet. Well,
why haven't you?
Why haven't you? And let's take this opportunity. I'll give you 10 or 15 minutes to discuss your case and see if there are some issues that you agree on. And inevitably, there's so many things that they do agree on once you understand the other party's position. And it's amazing how many things and issues and disputes can get resolved when people just listen to each other.
Now, being a district court judge, you really travel the circuit like the circuit judges in days gone by. But a typical month for you might involve what?
Well, I was just explaining it before we started this discussion here that we're elected out of the entire first judicial district, so it consists of 7 counties. It's almost the size of a congressional district.
I think it's the largest one in the state, is it not? Or
it might be in population, but I'm not. No, it's not. It's not in population, but it's one of the larger districts. We've got some districts up north that don't have the population, but the size of their districts are much larger than ours. But it's still 7 counties, 7 county seats, 7 courthouses, and then in Dakota we've got actually 3 courthouses. You've got the Northern Service Center in West St. Paul and the Western Service Center in Apple Valley. So we're holding court as close to the people as possible in Dakota County in those 3 locations, Hastings, West St. Paul, and in Apple Valley, as a convenience to the citizens and to the officers from the police forces that have to come and testify. And we want to make sure that people do have access to the courts, but
not necessarily convenient to the judges, however.
Well, it allows us to get around, and it allows us to see different practitioners, different attorneys, and different venues. So we were in Shakopee 2 weeks ago. A week ago, we were in my court reporter and my law clerk we were in Carver County, in Chaska. A week before that, we were down in Red Wing, and then this week alone, I've been in Apple Valley, West St. Paul, and then 3 days in Hastings, since we're taping this on
There was
Friday.
a movie a few years ago, if it's Tuesday, this must be Belgium. That's what it sounds like,
It
yeah.
gets to feel like that sometimes.
And of course, there are jury trials and there are non-jury trials. There are civil cases and there are criminal cases. And you run the gamut. You do them all.
Right, and that's one of the things I like about practicing or being a judge in our district, is that we do get to see a variety of cases. So in the morning I might have some criminal cases, and then in the afternoon I might have some family law cases. The next day we'll have some orders for protection and traffic offenses, but it's a large variety, and it keeps us on our toes. It keeps us interested in the job. And
you read in the paper sometimes, such and such was in an accident, drunk driver, twice the blood level that's permissible, and then you hear that person had 6 or 7 or 8 priors. Why is that person still on the street? How does that work?
Well, you have to ask the question of over what period of time. And so in Minnesota, when I was in the legislature, we passed the felony DWI law, so that if you have you have 4 DWIs within a 10-year period, you'll be charged with a felony level offense, and you could be sentenced to prison. And so
For what period of time?
I'm not sure what the maximum is, but oftentimes those people will be on probation. We want to make sure that they, number one, don't ever do this again. And a lot of people say, well, why do you put people on probation versus sending them to prison? In prison, they might get a 2-year sentence or a 1.5-year sentence, or what we call a year and a day. That's the lowest entryway sentence to prison, is a year and a day. And so they end up, because of our laws, they end up with good time, and that's an incentive for them to cooperate and behave while they're in prison. So they would end up doing 8 months. So they're 8 months and they're out. The other option is to put them on probation. We could put them on probation up to 5 years in a first-time felony DWI instance, require that they never use alcohol, require that they go and get alcohol treatment, require that they speak to students and others that have been impacted or that have been charged with drunk driving offenses. We want to make a change in the person's life.
And you want to get them back into society.
Well, we know they're going back into society. That's the biggest thing.
As a useful citizen.
Right. So that's the question. How do they go back into society? And we have a longer period of accountability. I think what my philosophy is, we need to hold people accountable for as long a period as possible. And that's not always sending them to prison for a relatively short period of time and then they're released. But if we're having people held accountable through our probationary system and rigorous requirements, that's the best way. And sometimes when we're in the midst of a very serious, contentious sentencing, and both sides feel very strongly what should happen, the one side will say, "Well, we want you to make them do all of these things. We want them to be required to go to treatment, to talk about the preventing this in other people's lives, to make sure they never use alcohol or drugs. We want that for a long period of time, but we also want you to send them to prison." Well, we can't do that. We only have 2 choices. We can put them on probation with all these requirements, and we can also sentence them up to a year in jail during that probationary period, or we can send them to prison. But we can't do both. So that's what people get confused about at times.
Pretty much the courts are overworked, however. I don't know, certainly public defenders I've spoken to think that their caseload is overwhelming. I don't know that it's so with prosecutors as much. But there is just a lot of business for your courts every day.
There is. It's not slowing down. There's no reprieve coming on that we can see in our statistics, in our caseload. Although we've been relatively flat in the caseload measurement area, but what we're looking at are much more complicated cases. So we have a criminal case. It's not just one crime; it's multiple crimes, and with a long history, and offenses that occurred in other jurisdictions, and trying to figure out what are we going to do with this defendant with all of these outstanding offenses and a lengthy criminal history, and what's appropriate for this individual. And so it's the process of gathering all of the information that sometimes is the burden on the court system, but it's certainly a burden on both the prosecutors and the public defenders to adequately prosecute the case and to adequately defend the case on the public defender's part and the private attorney's part, to make sure they have all that information so they can recommend fair sentences.
And what people often don't understand is they see the judge come on the bench at 9 o'clock, off for lunch, back on, done for the day by around 4 or whatever. However, if a decision has to be written, there has to be research involved. Where is the time for that? The judge is working in chambers on research, on decisions, on looking over the papers for that particular day's cases and or otherwise, so that it's not just a 9 to 4 job with time off for lunch. Excuse me.
Right.
I'm fighting a cold here, but
Well, don't give that cold to me.
I try not to.
No, that's one of the things we're looking at in the court system. We, with so much sitting and such a sedentary job, the unfortunate part, we had 3 judges get taken to the emergency room last week in our district.
Wow.
It was a wake-up call for all of us, I think, because we're reading, we're getting into the office, preparing the cases, getting on the bench at 9 o'clock, going till lunch, getting on back in our chambers, sitting at our desk, going through and reviewing what happened, and preparing for the afternoon, and then we have another calendar in the afternoon. And so we're just sitting, and then we're sitting on the bench, then we're sitting in our chambers, and we're sitting on the bench again, and so we're looking at how can I read and walk at the same time, or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that's not just an issue for judges on the bench, but it's an issue for society, because so many of us have jobs now where we're sitting in front of a computer screen all day and not getting up. And so the discussion about what's ergonomically correct and how we can have healthier work habits. And
Well, where do you find time to do workouts, for instance?
Well, my wife is all over me on that, and we're trying to get to do a little workout at 5:30 or 6 o'clock
In the morning?
in the morning.
Yeah. So your day starts, say, 5 o'clock in the morning, but it doesn't end.
Yeah, not quite at 5 o'clock. I'm not getting up that early yet. But
Now, of all the types of cases, I've heard judges say the most difficult ones are divorces, and probably even more difficult if children are involved. Is that your feeling?
Oh, definitely. It's so true. Any of us can think about our own children and how dear they are to us and how concerned we are for our children, and that's how divorcing parties view it as well, is that the children are so important to them, and they're the only ones that can provide for their children, and they feel like since they're
But
getting...
the emotions are so high with two people who,
Right.
embarked on this marriage together and then have come to a point where the love is gone or something is gone, and
There's a song, Where Did the Love Go, right?
yeah.
Well, what I explain to people is the difference between a criminal case and a family law case is a criminal case, there's an action, there's an event that occurs, it's a crime, and now there's an investigation, and they're arrested, and they're taken into custody, and then the emotion is at the time the offense is committed. And by the time they get to the court, they kind of know what's going on. People, there's discussions, there's negotiations, and there's a resolution. But there's nothing. And oftentimes, 95% of the cases get settled. But there's oftentimes the jury trial, which is somewhat emotional at times. But they know what the presentation is going to be, they know what the evidence is going to be, and the emotion is kind of taken out of those criminal cases. Whereas as you correctly point out, in a family law, there's a long time deterioration of a relationship. And then it's the fireworks and the court hearing. And that's when the emotions are at their highest and where the parties are the most heated. And that happens in our courtrooms.
Custody.
And then arguing about custody, of course. And we are very concerned about what happens in court and the animosity, the anger,
Right.
and the possible threats between the litigating parties and even towards the court. And so recently we just got metal detectors in both the Apple Valley Courthouse and in the West St. Paul Courthouse, and that's
Long overdue.
long overdue. But it's a great tribute to our county board and our county commissioners who really stepped up and saw the need and have funded not only the equipment, but they've also funded the extra positions in the sheriff's department. And our preceding, or the last three sheriffs, and particular Sheriff Tim Leslie, is to be congratulated for assisting the courts and the county commissioners.
Tim's a great guy, and he's going to be here next month, as a matter of fact.
Great.
And,
He's
here.
wonderful
And
sheriff.
Sharon has gone through the Citizens Academy with the sheriff.
Oh, okay.
And so I don't talk back to her. That's, but yeah.
So you're right about these custody cases, these family law cases. They're very, very emotional, and people have a very difficult time looking outside of themselves and trying to see reality in a new way as a separated couple rather than as a whole family as they were once upon a time.
And it's very painful, and it, of course, it's painful for the children too, because they are really torn in a contested custody case.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, you are a member of the Board of Judicial Standards.
Yes.
What, in addition to everything else that you're doing, and you have, I notice, a lot of different things that you are involved in judicially, but what's the Board of Judicial Standards?
Well, that's the board established by the legislature and appointed by the governor that that monitors the judge's compliance with the Code of Judicial Conduct. And so we handle complaints from the public, complaints from attorneys, complaints that come in about judges, and review their conduct in comparison to the Code of Judicial Conduct. So,
Yeah, because every once in a while, as happens to people, a judge will necessarily, or not necessarily, but will have mental problems, things like that. You have complaints. They get abusive sometimes, at least the ones I used to deal with in New York. But
I bet you the New York judges were much different than the judges in Minnesota.
life is much different in New York, believe me. But no, but great respect for the judiciary. And
Well, the judges need to comport themselves according to the rules, and that engenders then the public's respect for the rule of law and the
sometimes
decisions.
it's difficult if you have litigants who are difficult and unruly. If you have lawyers who overstep their bounds, it becomes very difficult. for you sitting up there to control all of that and to try to calm things down so you can do what a judge should do, which is to litigate the matter fairly.
You're right, and we need to maintain our demeanor and maintain the respect for the parties and for the process. And it's certainly not necessarily respect for the judge or who the judge is, but it's the process that the citizens have decided that this is how we're going to resolve our disputes. And it needs to be, we need to be compliant with the rules, and we need to uphold the decorum, unlike what you're seeing in some of these presidential debates. But that is the number one complaint that we deal with on the Board of Judicial Standards is a decorum issue with judges. And as somebody once told my wife and I, as we were raising our children, never get on the roller coaster with your children. So we, as judges, the same rule applies. Don't get on the roller coaster of these litigants and their anger and the emotion that they're carrying into the courtroom. We can't get on that roller coaster with them. We have to stay back.
Sometimes it has to be difficult, though.
It's very difficult, and as voices raise and tempers flare, but we're to be the unbiased referee of the disputes that appear.
Well, that's why the statue of justice is blindfolded.
Exactly.
But I also note that she carries a sword. But
no swords in our courtrooms.
It's a pleasure to have you back, but we don't really have time for any in-length discussions. Quickly, how has the job changed in the time you've been, the 12 years?
Well, Minnesota is really leading the nation in going electronic. And what that means for the average litigant is that the filings are all online. They can file online. It's not all this paperwork and delays, so things are instantaneous. One example is when I first started, we would go to the law enforcement center in the jail and do bail release hearings, and I would set bail, and it would be 9 o'clock in the morning, but the defendant's family and the defendant wouldn't, or the defendant would know, but the defendant's family wouldn't know how much bail was until the paperwork got processed, maybe much later in the afternoon of that day.
So we're really
But now it's
an IT world where everything is instantaneous.
Exactly. And so when I first started, there were piles of files that I would have to review, and the carts would come down the hallways every afternoon for the files for the next morning, and we would pile them up on the desk and go through
And
and try
now
to
it's all
find
on
them
the computer.
Now it's all on the computer with the click of the keys.
And the time clock says that our 30 minutes is up.
Well, it's been a
So,
pleasure.
Really nice
Thanks
to
for
have
having
you
me
back.
on.
We can pursue that one further another time.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Judge David Knutson, thank you.
Thank you.